This video is brought to you by Midway USA. Support the channel by choosing Midway for your shooting and outdoor supplies.
Suboptimal cheek weld. Zenitco parts put onto it like it's a steampunk project. Stand by.
Impact. Neutralized. 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 Just short right edge. Just off the right. Impact. I couldn't tell. Yeah.
That's it?
Yeah. Neutralized.
1:09. Nearly 2 minutes.
Yikes.
I will say the most difficult part of that was that last target.
Yeah.
There's two aiming reference points on the EOTech that we see right here. The second dot on the bottom correlated well to the 500-yard target, so you could see that pushing out to it, even though I had a suboptimal cheek weld and that was something I had to fight through, I was able to get to the 500 with no issue. Once we passed the 500, the issues arose, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, it's also, to be honest with you, there were a couple of shots there that I couldn't really tell if it was a hit or not. That last one, I was more than 75%. I was pretty sure it's a hit.
Yeah.
I mean, to the point where I was confident to stop you.
I mean, needless to say, we're not going to push this to the bonus target. Regardless, that was actually a very challenging run, and I do welcome these challenges. It's an enjoyable run, but I think there is even more than normal to talk about, and we will see you guys at the debrief.
Привет, товарищ. You must have caught me admiring my flowers. I was only about to fertilize them, the best way I know. The Russian way. I hope you're enjoying the show so far, because shows like this, they're brought to you, of course, by Slate Black Industries, but most importantly, they're brought to you by the patrons of Patreon and Utreon. That's right. This group of comrades, they support us financially, intellectually, but most importantly, emotionally. So today I'd like to invite you. Come, join us. Become one of us. Together, we are going to start the revolution in small arms development. But if you cannot, we understand. We will be just as happy to see your comments in the comment section below. But for now, I have to finish fertilizing, and we will get on with the show.
Welcome into the debrief for this run. On the Speedway runs, we break down our evaluations based on segmented categories. So we'll talk about the overall run and the shooter's performance, hitting on how the base firearm, the sighting system, the cartridge, and the environmentals all came into play during the course of the run. Now, unlike our regular practical accuracy series, the Speedway course challenges the shooter to shoot as fast as possible while also accounting for constantly changing elevation and wind holds as needed. This presents a unique challenge that the shooter then has to overcome. So let's get into it. All right, welcome into the debrief. We have run the first Kalashnikov through the Speedway course. And this is important in and of itself because in spite of the fact that we have shot a number of AKs and Kalashnikov platforms on our practical accuracy course, the Speedway is just simply more difficult. The shooter is A, on the clock, so has the stressors of time. B, is not getting the same level of spotter support. And C, is having to remember all of those holds working out, again, because no spotter support and on the clock, so no time to reference a catalog of holds, for example, or to confirm with the spotter where the holds should be. And so, Henry, talk us through real quickly why we chose this particular Kalashnikov to be the one that we would start with to sort of establish a baseline with for Speedway, and your general thoughts on how you think you did with it as run number one.
Yeah, so the baseline, Josh is right with us on the baseline. We deliberately chose things that we could use as a baseline. I believe we started with, was it the SCAR or the Mark 12? Either one of those.
SCAR Mark 12s shot in the same few days to establish baseline. Yeah.
Yep. So we deliberately chose the weapon systems that we thought would perform the best out of those categories on this field. And so the Mark 12 as probably one of the most well-suited rifles for this defensive marksman role. We dropped it on there and saw how it did. Now, the SCAR being the most modernly updated battle rifle with an LPVO is probably the most well-suited rifle, well, clone correct, well, not really clone correct, but used rifle for this role. And on that continuation, the Spets AK, the AK74, modernized with the Zenitco kit and using basically the technology that a lot of the FSB, GRU, Spetsnaz operators tended to drift towards during the build up towards the 2022 timeframe. That's what we looked at, and we chose, hey, this is probably the best example of a rifle that could, in the AK category, that could fill this role. Now, technically, I'm going to throw some jabs right here. Technically, there was another AK variety that we've already filmed on Speedway. That is a DMR, well, Soviet sniper. But Speedway was
Big
not
AK.
too kind.
Big AK.
Speedway was not kind to Big AK. But but from the Russian variety, as we digress back to the main point, this is probably what we see right now in the 2023 timeframe and previous to this. The sort of the peak derivative of an AK, refined for a lot of combat use and a multi-purpose combat use for a special operations force.
Right. And so with that, we have a rifle that the base rifle, while certainly capable in terms of accuracy and acceptable accuracy, is not as tight shooting as, say, the Mark 12 is, for example, at least not on the average and a comparison of numerous examples, but is still adequate to be able to engage out at distance with a upgrade package that includes the addition of some rail systems, which add some weight, and we'll talk about that in a second, but more importantly, allow for the addition of an optics package. And in this instance, we used the 2-dot EOTech with a 3-power magnifier. And so let's hop right into the optics package itself and talk about how that particular element of the system influenced you in this area, either positively or negatively.
Sure. So we were using the EOTech EXPS 3-2 with a magnifier behind it. It was an EOTech magnifier. It was the
Aim point magnifier.
Okay.
But yeah.
Okay. It was a magnifier. And honestly, the EOTech plus magnifier combination, especially right here with the 2 dots on the reticle, that is an exceptionally powerful system to add to. Well, it's a powerful optical system to add to a weapon system itself. Because we're looking at the center dot being a short dot, zeroed at around I think we zeroed at 200 meters, 250 meters.
Yes. Yeah,
And
about
then
200 meters, yeah.
And then a long dot being at 500 yards, so 450 meters or so. Mm-hmm. That covers your average, your 2 average engagement distances. So, your short dot for everything around the 300 meter pocket. So 300 meters, you would just aim a little higher. And then pushing out to the long dot, you would cover extended distances if you needed to cover your troops any more than that. So essentially, you have that 500 yard, 450, 500 meter pocket around you that you could engage, which covers a lot of the combat distances out there. But the most important thing is, since it's an EOTech, you could drop the magnifier if you're up close and use it in CQB very handedly. It's a heads up system. I know this doesn't pertain to Speedway per se, but if you were using nods, if you were using night vision, the EOTech also lends itself to be extremely useful with night vision because you could passively aim. And in a combat situation, it is an advantage if you have a very good sighting system for night vision without having to flash infrared laser out there. So it's a sighting system that is very well suited towards combat. I would say the biggest downside to it comes down to battery life, but that's neither here nor there for Speedway itself.
Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that I find interesting here is I really struggle with the 2-dot EOTechs without a magnifier. With the magnifier, I think they're fantastic. Mm-hmm. Without the magnifier, those 2 dots tend to pixelate and bleed together on me, especially if I'm trying to use them to bracket a target, say at 400, where I've got the lower dot is at the base of the target, the upper dot is sort of at the head level of the target, and I've got that pixelation in between, and that has to do in many, many ways with my own eyesight and the issues I have with eyesight. But with the magnifier, as you say, it makes it materially better. And the 2-dot system is actually something which I've recently really found favor with in a completely separate optic and actually in a magnified LPVO, the CAL-S 1-6, which has a specific reticle that I found recently that I like that does have a 2-dot system for, as you say, sort of 0 to 3, 350-ish, and then also being able to use that second dot starting around 4 at a base hold and extending it out to 550 plus as a reference point, as basically a second refined aiming point within the reticle. And that's sort of what the EOTech does as well, which makes it very interesting. So with the optic choice, it's still not going to be as refined in any way, shape, or form as some of the other stuff we've shot. We've shot the PLX-C, the 1 to 8 power primary arms optic on the SCAR. We've shot the 4 to 16 Attacker from Night Force. I think we had your Leupold in there for one of the Mark 12 runs. We've shot a 4 power ACOG, and all of those, in my mind, lend themselves better in the actual sort of, as you've said, defensive marksman's role that is the Speedway course template.
Yeah, I think it's going to be difficult for a holographic sight to challenge an actual tube optic when it comes to this style of shooting. I mean, that's just
Right.
that is just how it is. But at the same time, your tube optic cannot do some of the things that your holographic sights can do. And
Yeah,
again,
you've referenced quite a few of them actually already.
yeah, and honestly, when it comes down to, I think this probably plays into sort of that Russian mentality of how they design things to drop down to the P setting on their iron sights, and they just have conscripts hold a one point, because they deliberately are trying to shave off that extra brain power that you're using in combat. They want people to just don't think of these holds, don't complicate these things, because then if you're a part of an assault, you're pushing across no man's land or something that's difficult to push across, and you constantly just drop in the prone and you continue to think about, okay, where's my hold, and you let off a few extra shots. That's more time for someone on the other side to spot where you are. And so it's sort of advantageous sometimes if you are in that stressful situation to have that 2-dot system, something that is a little bit more simple, to where you could recognize 200 meters or 400 meters plus or minus, somewhere in between those 2 dots. Just lays those dots there and go. I think that is a lot of times we say what's old is new. The old M16L leaf sight with the long range and the short range system, the same thing on the M1 carbine. A lot of times you see when weapon systems are manufactured during wartime, I mean, one, it cuts down your manufacturing costs for that particular thing. But then on the other end, from a soldier's perspective, having them learn how to use battle sight settings helps them in the long term just push rounds close to or very, on target at these very distances, which is not an easy thing when you're looking at using a mil-dot sight. Like a 10x mil-dot sight is actually harder to do that than a 2-dot combat sight, because there's so much more that has to go through with training. You have to remember, okay, 0.5 mils, 200, 1.3 mils at 300, and then 2.2 at 400, and then you have to figure out the distance. I mean, that's just too much to go through your mind when you're facing an assault.
Right, so almost within the context of lowest common denominator, the more simple you can make something, the overall results are generally going to be better across the entire population of the thing. Right. Obviously, someone who's exceptionally skilled with a certain particular setup is going to be extremely skilled with that particular setup, i.e. your mil-dot scope, for example. But if you gave it out to every Tom, Dick, and Harry, that doesn't necessarily translate over to be true.
Right. I mean, it's basically an insurance policy that people could use this with some type of efficiency, rather than just completely getting confused and being combat ineffective.
So with that said, and we've talked at length about the AK sort of practical accuracy in terms of being able to hit out at distance, and how, especially with the 5.45 round, one which has a superior ballistic coefficient to the standard M193, for example, you actually are in pretty comparable territory to, if not potentially even superior territory, give or take, with what the raw paper accuracy is between, say, something like this and an M4. Like for like, set up exactly the same, quote unquote. Would you agree at this point, having shot both of these on the various courses, assuming you're shooting 55s out of an M4 system, that both of these are going to be relatively comparable in terms of capability in a 0 to 500 pocket?
If we're talking about using the same optic setup,
yeah, same sighting system, basically like a railed, say, call it a block 1.5 or block 2 M4 with the same exact sighting setup, but the same standardized type of ammunition, not 77s, not something superior in that regard.
I would say it's comparable, but the M4 still is the system itself still is a little bit more accurate than the AK. But that bit of accuracy, that extra like 1 inch less or like 1 MOA less at a 500 yard setting on torso targets makes less of a difference than people out there would think it does when it correlates to effective fire on target.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
So talk us through then, Henry. Within the 0 to 500 envelope, you were pretty lights out on this run. I was really impressed watching it go out. And then when you get to 650, which granted, that's a big jump, 500 to 650, it's only 150 yards further, right? But that's a lot when we're at that portion of the course. It's not the same as going from 100 to 250, for example. When we're stretching from the 5 to 650, we saw a pretty material drop off in the effectiveness, or at least your effectiveness, to be able to collect the hits out on the further 650 target. What was going on there? Was that a accuracy problem? Was that reaching the peak of what this rifle's sort of accuracy envelope is capable of, or was it something else? Was it a sighting system issue, for example?
It was a sighting system issue. I mean, it's a sighting system limitation, shall I say. With a 2-dot system, it's great pushing out. Even in the in-between targets, you could still find reference points between the 2 dots to figure out where it is. But once you depart that last dot, you are leaving the edge of space, right? At that point, you're starting to find things around you as reference points.
You get the bottom of the donut, right? The bottom of the donut is the only other thing that you have within the optic.
Yeah, and at that point, you're just finding things around you as reference points to try to correlate to and see if you're getting a hit. And so I think some people would ask, so what if you just put an LPVO onto the Kalash? I mean, that's a valid question. I personally still prefer the EOTech over LPVO. I don't have any material evidence of this, but I sense, maybe this is from running the AK-12 when I tried to run it, which the AK-12 isn't the best example for AK dust covers holding 0. LPVOs are heavier, I guess, than some of these other systems. And in my opinion, it doesn't. The AK is an exceptionally awesome recoil, like especially the 74 when you upgrade it, is an exceptional recoil soaking machine to where it just drops rounds really fast on close range targets, heads up aiming and everything. You could use LPVOs, but that's not lending to the true strength of the AK as a combat weapon. So I don't.
So you almost have like a specific aversion to it, just sort of out of what makes sense to you, like in your soul.
Yeah, I guess so. It's like, call it that I don't have as much experience running LPVOs on AKs, I suppose. I don't think it's like undoable, obviously. But in this particular case, the reason it's outfitted like this is because it's trying to adopt to a multi-purpose mission role. And the strength of this platform goes out to about 450, 500 meters. Past that, it is actually difficult to find a reference point on it. Can you? Yes, you can. It's just a little bit more difficult than LPVOs in this instance.
Yeah, and what we know is that the grouping at that distance, since this is approximately a 2.75 to 3-inch gun, I believe, when we did our paper accuracy on it, the grouping out at 600-ish is going to be an 18-inch wide grouping, which is still full torso size, but we're shooting sub-torso. And by the time you get out to 700, then you're looking at north of 20-inch grouping, 21-inch grouping. And so you're starting to get a little bit beyond the accuracy envelope to begin with, right? So sort of setting it up for success within the accuracy envelope with which it's best suited to participate, with which the round is best suited to participate as well, tends to make sense. So a few final points then. One of the things, and shout out to Calvin at Firepower United, since he posts about this all the time and it makes me laugh. You specifically loaded the AK and then took your hand off the fire control pistol grip to rack the bolt.
Yeah.
And inevitably, somebody has not made it this far in the video and has already commented down below that this is verboten. You have done the bad things because you removed your hand from firing control. What say you?
Well, it's interesting. I think a lot of guys like to. It's a good thing to train. It's a good thing to learn techniques. But a lot of times you'll see people they take a technique and they apply it to everything because that's what they know. You don't know what you don't know, but the worst thing to that is what you do know turns into gospel, and you constantly shove it into people's faces without considering the context. As I'm shooting in the prone position and I'm removing the magazine, if I were to already slap another long AK magazine there and try to have to weave my hand through to find the charging handle and get into an uncomfortable, unnatural position to cross my hands and rack it, that would actually be detrimental to my performance. And so, of course, I drop the mag, slap a new one in, and I just use the hand that is most available, rack it, and I get back into shooting. Do I break my pistol grip? Sure, yes. But to me, that's not as detrimental as getting into an unnatural position to execute a style of reload that is a little bit more optimized for your short range or heads up display engaging situations. That's just taking a technique and turning it into gospel and applying it to everything. So that's my opinion. I think people should not take one technique and apply it to everything. People should actually think about what they're doing and figure out why they are doing certain things, why they are using their body mechanics a certain way, and try to problem solve in the more logical solution. Now, sometimes people do crazy things because of that, but the flat range is a place. The flat range is a place to figure these things out rather than being in a gunfight and trying to figure this stuff out.
Absolutely. So, what we've shown today is probably the AK74 in what we would probably describe as peak form, which is what sort of, as you said, 2015 to 2022 era of AK-74 before the AK-12 comes into play and sort of maximize based on what I suppose time in Syria being the max end of the modernization package for the 74 itself. Is that a fair way that we've categorized this in the past?
Yeah.
And so for those who are watching, if you guys are interested, we have this particular rifle shooting on the practical accuracy course out to 500, where it had a very, very solid run. We also have numerous videos on the show where this particular rifle or series of rifles is covered, both from their original inception during the Cold War all the way through to the modernization videos as well, carrying it from that period of time up through, again, sort of the 2020 time period. And so with that, Henry, do you have anything else to add?
I do, absolutely.
Shall we wrap
Yes.
it?
I do
Okay.
actually have a point that has been in my mind, and it comes down to weight and recoil control versus being able to perceive what's going on downrange, because that is an element to Speedway that we typically have to address. One of the challenging things with Speedway is it is shooter spotting. So I do not have the help of Josh in spotting the targets, what's going on. And so in the past, when you shoot a heavier recoiling rifle, it is more difficult to track what's going on downrange. And if I do miss the target, or even if I hit the target, it's more difficult with a heavier recoiling rifle to figure out where the rounds are going. And as a rifle, I think you and I agree that the Spets AK-74 is probably one of the heaviest pigs to lug around.
It's definitely one of the heavier rifles, especially for the cartridge it's shooting. When you're talking about a .223 caliber or a 5-point XX caliber.
A light rifle, high velocity cartridge.
That's it. Yes.
The advent of the AK-74 brake, which is extremely efficient to begin with, the use of the extreme low recoil 545 cartridge that was developed specifically for low recoil before any accuracy considerations were there. The AK-74 has all of the hallmarks of basically it peaks on recoil mitigation on all of those aspects. And even with the glass quality out of a magnifier is not nearly as good as an LPVO or an actual scope. Even with the lower glass quality of a magnifier, I was able to spot where I was hitting and correct to them very, very easily. And I think a large part of that has to do with the low recoil characteristics of a souped-up Spetsnaz AK-74.
Yeah, that's a great point. So again, when it comes down to conversations on weight versus, if you want to call it, shootability of the gun, and when it comes down to something like simply as muzzle brake versus flash hider as an example, all of these things have give and takes. Nothing is definitively correct or incorrect. You find a balance of these things based upon what you're attempting to do with the firearm or ask the firearm to do for you.
It's context driven.
Absolutely. All right, gang. With that said, be sure to check out the Utreon page, the Patreon page, the Rumble page, if you prefer to follow us on other alternatives to YouTube. And your support there is always appreciated. And in addition, check out 9H Podcasts for the podcast episodes as well. And until next time, we'll see you on the range.
До свидания.
Patron 6 is Steel Knight 6, 4 Vic, 8 packs, Redcon 1, green to green, time copy, over.
Steel Knight 6, this is Patron 6, roger, over. 1-6, Steel Knight 1, 1 pack, green, green, over. This is Patron 6, roger, over.
1-6, Steel Knight 2, 1 Victor, 2 packs, Redcon 1, over.